Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show where we will have a recap regarding 2024, such an eventful year. And we're going to talk about the highlights of what happened in the past year and the expectations moving forward, the different scenarios that we might have moving forward, including the prospect of things de-escalating or having something far worse than what we have already seen in the past year. But I'm going to start off with basic updates for all of you with what happened in the past couple of days. The first very significant thing that I wanted to talk to you about is the case of the Israeli prisoners of war inside of Gaza. Now, there have been many statements coming out in the past weeks regarding these prisoners of war inside of Israel, coming from the top figures inside of the Israeli political echelon and figures even in the Israeli army. And of course, we had comments as well from the Palestinian resistance. Now, the families of the Israeli prisoners of war are the key element in what's happening. But these people have been protesting for a very long time to stop the war, get these people back, and at any cost, as a matter of fact, ever since the beginning of the war and the escalation when it comes to Israel's genocide in Gaza, the tone escalated with time. These people started to blame Benjamin Netanyahu and their government and everyone in charge and who is participating in the negotiations with the Palestinian side, with the other mediators, that they're all responsible, but primarily Benjamin Netanyahu, in killing the prisoners of war due to the delay in what's happening. But things got heated more after this report came about a statement coming from none other than Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister and a key ally of Benjamin Netanyahu. He told the families of those who are kidnapped in Gaza, I cannot guarantee that your family member will return alive from captivity. This is another confirmation that these people have interest in killing all of the prisoners of war, saying that we cannot guarantee that these people will go back. And at a meeting, he was at a meeting with the families of the prisoners of war, and what they were looking for is reassurance. So the Israelis who have family members inside of Gaza, whether combatants or were non-combatants at the time, because of course with the Israeli society, most of them are reservists at the end of the day, anyone who falls under conscription, to say the least. They were trying to get a reassurance from someone within the government, especially Smotrich, who is well known to be a person that wants to escalate things even further, calls for settlements inside of Gaza, alongside many other things. But they got the opposite, to a level where they started to say, we went out from the meeting shocked, totally shocked, gobsmacked. What happened? We went there to get reassurance, and this man is telling us, I cannot guarantee that any family member will go back alive. And what is he saying? What is he promising instead? He says, I promise that we will get all of the corpses back by military action. So this indicates that he's not interested in any type of political resolution. Smotrich was one of the main people calling Netanyahu not to have a ceasefire agreement with the Palestinian side. And now he's making it more obvious to the families of the prisoners of war. Now, although they've been blaming Netanyahu with all of this for a long time, this is a step further. A step further that led father of one of the Israelis who are kidnapped inside of Gaza to go and meet Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor of the ICC, and he has a meeting with him next month to tell him what? To tell him that Benjamin Netanyahu is committing a genocide in Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu is not committing a genocide only against the Palestinian people. Benjamin Netanyahu is committing a genocide against the Israelis. And this man will be going with a file with him. He is the father, Yehuda Cohen, his name is, father of the kidnapped soldier Nimrod Cohen. And he said that in a meeting with the Constitutional Law and Justice Committee. So many of them met in the Israeli Knesset as well. And he's going to try and convince Karim Khan to say that Netanyahu committed a genocide in Israel as well, and proceedings should be taken against him. And we had multiple reports about this. One of the other reports was in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. He's going there, and parts of the things that he wants to say is, well, Benjamin Netanyahu, firstly, we are a family in Israel who served in the Israeli army, but I have nothing else. I have nothing else apart from to join hands with movements and organizations that are hostile to the state of Israel as a whole, hostile to the entirety, to the existence of the state of Israel, to get my son back. Because Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want to get the Israelis from Gaza back. As a matter of fact, and we stated this many times, Israel tried to kill them from day one. Those who were released in the temporary ceasefire, they said Israel was targeting us multiple times. And Israel killed approximately half of them inside of Gaza. And why did they do that? Well, they did that deliberately so that the Palestinian resistance cannot have a car to negotiate with, and so that they don't have internal pressure. And these people, the families of the Israeli prisoners of war in Gaza, they are viewed by some in Israel who are aligned with Benjamin Netanyahu as supporters of Hamas, blatant supporters of Hamas. So it's getting worse when it comes to Israel. Not only that they're viewed as a pariah state and that, well, there's an arrest warrant against Netanyahu and Gallant, and it's a country committing genocide according to the ICJ. Now, internally, there's more action being taken against the state, against Benjamin Netanyahu, against everyone leading this campaign, to a level where this man was saying, I want to convince the Hague that Netanyahu committed a genocide inside of Israel. This is something very important. The following thing that I wanted to talk to you about is, well, what's happening when it comes to Yemen? Yemen, there are more reports now that Israel is looking to go on an all-out war against Yemen. Why is that? Well, they're saying that these people have been targeting us for so long. We haven't been able to take down the threat, and we need to do something very significant against Ansarullah. There were a couple of reports in one of them was in the Times as well, this one right here, to go fully in Yemen. Why Yemen? Why not Iran? Well, because according to Netanyahu and the Israeli genocide army, it's easier to go against Yemen. But they're contradicting themselves, and this indicates that there's a big lack of vision and strategy when it comes to Israel. They don't have a bank of targets inside of Yemen. They do not have a bank of targets inside of Yemen, and nothing that they targeted in Yemen stopped the Yemeni Ansarullah from targeting Israel and continuing the blockade in the Red Sea and in other areas too, to force Israel and apply more pressure on them to stop the genocide inside of Gaza, to a level where Israel now formed a unit, an intel unit, specifically for Yemen, but they're still unable to get the intel that they want, and they're being supported. They're being supported by the genocide cartel led by the United States. However, even that genocide cartel is failing miserably. Ansarullah expelled 3 U.S. aircraft carriers. The last one, USS Harry S. Truman, had to retreat alongside other destroyers too, due to continued attacks. Lincoln and Eisenhower had to go away completely, withdraw from the region. The United States administration said it's due to maintenance. But how is Israel trying to do, what are they going to do exactly with Yemen? when it comes to attacking them. And there were more comments coming today from some figures in Yemen. One of their senior figures said the attacks on Yemen have no military value. The attacks on Yemen, one of the Houthi leaders said, have no military value, and Israel will see the results of its stupidity. They're still targeting Israel every single day. What do you mean stupidity there? And they're going to pay? Are they going to escalate? Yes, they're probably going to escalate. Why? Because Ansarullah had phases in the escalation. Phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Likewise with Hezbollah. But now it appears to be that they have another phase that they're preparing for. They haven't declared it yet. So far, we're still in phase 5. An increase in the geographical areas targeted, an increase in the weapons used, and the quality and the quantity of weapons used, not only against Israel, but against the genocide coalition too. And we might see a phase where we have more escalation coming from Ansarullah that clearly have an arsenal that intimidates Israel and makes them have very serious calculation to a level where they're considering an all-out war against Yemen. How effective that would be? Ineffective. Ineffective, why? Purely based on examples that we have. Look at the example of Gaza. 15 months into an awful barbaric genocide by these mass terrorists, and the Palestinian resistance is not only still there, but is getting stronger according to and confirmed by Israel. Israeli reports, senior figures in the Israeli political and military establishment, saying that Hamas have now more soldiers than they had before, and they're introducing new weapons. They're targeting them in the most northern parts of Gaza. They're launching missiles every single day on Israel for the past week now, even today. What does that all tell you? Israel had a temporary invasion in Beit Hanun, the most northern part of Gaza, and they were immediately targeted. And Israel confirmed that at least one was killed and 4 were wounded. That's according to Israeli numbers, of course, and they hide the numbers. So, well, they can try and escalate. How effective that would be? Not very effective, but it could escalate things to a level where Ansarullah would introduce a new phase that would be even more unbearable for the genocide state. That's when it comes to the news. That's when it comes to the updates that I wanted to talk to you about. Now we're going to head to the recap. We're going to have a recap about 2024. Talk briefly. I mean, we're going to try and be thorough and brief at the same time, succinct. And I'll, of course, open the space up for any questions or comments after I share my summary with you. So, of course, in the beginning of 2024, we already had a continuation of what happened following the 7th of October. Hamas launched an operation called Al-Aqsa Flood on the 7th of October. That was unprecedented in the history of the conflict between the Israeli Zionist state and the Palestinians and even the Arab states surrounding them. They started the campaign at 6:29 in the morning. Later on, it was declared by their military commander, MahmoodOD. They launched this campaign with approximately 5,000 missiles and projectiles being launched at Israel in the course of 25 minutes. And they took down their fighters, went through the borders, and liberated temporarily Palestinian occupied territories. After what? After they took down all of the Gaza division, a whole army division that was considered to be the most sophisticated in the Israeli army, with the main primary responsibility of making sure nothing comes out of Gaza in a matter of 2 hours. And they kidnapped senior commanders in the Gaza division that are still held inside of Gaza. Nothing from the reports that came after what happened on the 7th of October spoke about the military humiliation of Israel and the fact that the Palestinian resistance primarily and at the core targeted the Gaza division, and then later on for other territories inside of occupied Palestine simply because of how easy it was when it comes to the taking down of the Gaza division. And of course, Israel had already certain preparations when it comes to the day. They carried out massacres against their own population on the 7th of October, primarily in the Nova Festival, but also in Ra'im and in other settlements in the areas surrounding Gaza. Israelis who were witnesses on the day and were met with Hamas fighters and resistance fighters on the day said that the majority of Israelis died because of the IDF firing shots at them. And then the images started to pop up several weeks after of what? Of the Israeli fighter jets and planes targeting everyone moving to Gaza, and also tanks in the Israeli settlements shooting at Israeli houses. Then more confirmation started to come from the Israeli Air Force pilots saying that we were ordered to shoot at everything moving back towards Gaza, regardless of who it was, without checking, without identity checks, without anything. Now, one of the big questions that rose at the time, and then we spoke about it many times, but I'll repeat it here, we're having a recap. Did Israel know about the 7th of October? Was this something coordinated? And if they did, why did they not prevent it? Which is a very interesting question, and no one can really say the level of knowledge that Israel had, but what we can establish our understanding on is what has been released so far. Now, first and foremost, the Palestinian resistance indeed prepared for a 7th of October. The Israeli military establishment knew very well that Hamas was preparing for a big attack on Israel. That's something that many knew in the Israeli establishment. Now, did they know about the 7th of October? Well, there were many reports inside of Israel that some soldiers notified about suspicious movements coming from Gaza, and these reports were dismissed by their commanders, whether when it comes to the Gaza division. Secondly, there were other reports that intel had been received by the Israeli intelligence services that was submitted to the office of Benjamin Netanyahu at least 6 hours before the attacks began. And we're only talking about the information that has been publicly available. And Netanyahu ignored it. Now, this caused a storm in Israel when it was released just over 2 months ago, approximately. And Benjamin Netanyahu, at the time, he denied having any knowledge, any prior knowledge about the 7th of October. And Israel, to this day, refuses to have an independent investigation when it comes to the 7th of October, something that led private families of Israelis who either lost their lives or were kidnapped to take action privately against the state of Israel. 27 families represented by some of the most well-known solicitors and legal professionals inside of Israel. However, that wouldn't be enough, because at the end of the day, you need to access certain information when it comes to the state. And following the propaganda of the 7th of October, like the 40 beheaded babies, like the raping, and like the massacres that Israel committed, and many things, of course, had no basis whatsoever, many people inside of Israel started to take back those claims, and even Joe Biden himself had to take back the claims about the 40 beheaded babies and all of the garbage propaganda and nonsense that Israel had prepared. There are other indications that someone in Israel knew that something was about to happen. Why? Because there were also suspicious movements inside of the stock market in Israel that were carried out by one of the largest banks in Israel called Bank Leumi, to do with shorting. And they made hundreds of millions based on these bets that were unlikely to be done or very abnormal for that time. So when it comes to the knowledge of Israel, you cannot deny that Israel had some sort of knowledge or warning that something was about to happen. To what level? Did they know all of the details? Did they know all of that? That is not likely. They likely knew that something was coming, but they did not know the level, the coordination, and everything that the Palestinian resistance had prepared for them. Why? Because the Palestinian resistance was preparing itself for years for that day, and they also cleared off every traitor inside of Gaza and anyone who could give Israel any sort of information, to a level where Israel started to feel more frustrated, and they tried to carry out special operations in previous years to have any sort of spy devices inside of Gaza that were also thwarted by Hamas at the time. These things are very important. So Israel had some sort of knowledge. However, from an Israeli perspective, they wanted to use that, but primarily Benjamin Netanyahu, before Israel as a state really, wanted to use that as an opportunity. Israel was already in a split society. The politicians were split too, even the military, before the 7th of October in 2023, with unprecedented protests and people in the streets fighting against the judicial reform, including many pilots in the Israeli army and many reservists signing mass letters to the government: we will not serve in a dictatorship. Now, Israel thought that we would unite the country, or Netanyahu himself, because he was the one leading it with his right-hand man, Yariv Levin, and in the judicial reform inside of Israel. He thought I would gather all of the Israelis around me if I go against the campaign, and will, of course, use the Palestinians as the problem. Everything they take out on the Palestinians, they try and get away with all of their problems by their racism and their hatred to anyone apart from them, to also cover up the internal division, internal hatred, and the fact that many of them loathe each other inside of Israel. And what's happening now is a prime example. People wishing their prime minister would be killed or assassinated, and networks operating for Iran knowingly and deliberately from all walks of life when it comes to Israel. What happened after the 7th of October? Well, massive shock. Israel was in a tough position. They would either go on a war with Hamas, or they would take a step back. The declaration that came from the Palestinian resistance at the time, highlighted by the speech of the commander-in-chief, MahmoodOD, that Israel claimed that they killed many times, by the way, including this time, but Hamas denied. He's a man who has been wanted for over 30 years now. The last photo of him was taken in approximately 1991. He said, well, the situation is no longer tolerated. Our brothers and sisters in the West Bank, Israel is stealing more land, killing more people, and primarily the situation of the prisoners cannot be tolerated. Now, we tried to reach an agreement with the Israelis for years, and that's true. 9 years they have been trying to reach a deal with 4 Israelis kidnapped in Gaza to have a prisoner exchange, and Israel neglected them, and now they're neglecting all of them too. That's something very significant. Alongside other problems for the Palestinian cause, and he also asked other resistance fronts to participate, and he primarily asked Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Iran. These are the countries that MahmoodOD asked to participate, and he called on all of the people to participate in what Hamas called Al-Aqsa flood. Okay, so the prisoners was a primary thing. Then there was an elaboration from the spokesperson of Azz al-Qassam Brigades, or Al-Qassam Brigades movement, armed wing of Hamas, Abu Ubaidah, saying that we're willing to enter negotiations and stop this campaign immediately, so long as Israel is willing to have a prisoner exchange. But Israel did not want that. What does that indicate? That indicates that Israel, of course, they already had a plan. They had a plan from 50 years ago regarding Gaza. They wanted to get rid of the population. They want to completely eliminate the prospect of having a Palestinian state. And they want to have a Jewish supremacy in terms of demographics too. They wanted to have a primary Jewish demographic majority between the Jordan River to the sea. They said, we'll take this opportunity and expel all of them. What did they do immediately? They immediately tried to implement the plan that they had for a very long time. What was that? A massive genocide campaign against the civilians, not against Hamas, and no measure whatsoever to try and protect the Israelis who were kidnapped by carpet bombing Gaza, again indicating they couldn't care less about what they call hostages, who are technically prisoners of war inside of Gaza. To do what? To force the population down south and open the borders with Egypt to let all of the Palestinians in. That was accompanied by a campaign coming from Western governments, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, going to Egypt to lobby and apply pressure on the Egyptian government to open the borders and allow an influx of every Palestinian inside of Gaza so that Israel can finish the campaign. In essence, an ethnic cleansing campaign without too much trouble for Israel. The Egyptian side resisted that. And to Israel, that was a big problem. And to the Israeli allies, it was a big problem too. At the time, the Egyptian president told one of the Western leaders, if the Israelis have a problem, they have a desert called the Negev Desert. Let them open that area and allow all of the Palestinian refugees in, but it's their land at the end of the day, and then get them back in once they finish. But they're not going to go into Sinai, because what Israel will be doing after that is using a pretext against Sinai, therefore leading to a pretext against Egypt as a whole. If the Palestinians are expelled to Sinai, that means Egypt is in charge. And if the Palestinians continue to conduct attacks from Sinai, that means Egypt is in charge, and Israel has an excuse to go and occupy Sinai or have an all-out attack against Egypt. And then we started to have more aggressive tones coming from Israel and Israeli leaders. Smotrich himself, the finance minister and a key ally of Benjamin Netanyahu, said that Egypt bears responsibility for the 7th of October because of the tunnel networks and how they allow weapons to go into Gaza. Okay. That did not work. We had a temporary ceasefire. That temporary ceasefire had certain clauses that were there to primarily try and extend the ceasefire, have more prisoner exchanges, and also eventually end the war. Now, Israel, the defense minister at the time, or the genocide minister at the time, Yoav Gallant, he signed the paper to end the ceasefire and restart the war. There were certain talks from the U.S. administration to try and continue, but Netanyahu resisted. And it reached a stage where Hamas said, we're no longer accepting any temporary ceasefires. From the beginning, and one of the main people who said was Saleh al-Aruri, a person in charge of Hamas abroad, who was assassinated in the southern suburb of Beirut early during the war. Now they're still implementing that. They're still insisting on not having another temporary ceasefire. Why? Because from their perspective, that does not really ensure that Israel would finish, and we don't want to risk Israel having another campaign. Again, we want to protect the Palestinian people. We don't want there to be a stage where, well, Israel stops and then they can all of a sudden attack and continue the destruction and kill people. Throughout this whole period, up until now, Israel faced resistance from Gaza that has been unmatched. If any army in the world, if many armies, to be more specific, in the world faced what the Palestinian resistance and the Palestinian people in Gaza faced, they would have raised the white flag a long time ago. But the Palestinian resistance is still there. They targeted over 1,300 Israeli IDF machinery vehicles in total, over 1,000 of which targeted were Merkava tanks, many troop carriers too, thousands of Israeli soldiers killed and wounded in the biggest losses of Israel in its history. Now, of course, they're not going to publish the numbers. Israel, from their perspective, they always cover up the numbers, but now, particularly when they're very desperate to have people, they hide these numbers. Of course, Israel destroyed the majority of Gaza when it comes to civilian buildings, civilian infrastructure, a massive genocide and infanticide attack on the health care of Gaza, the food, the energy, electricity, for fun. It showed the whole world the true nature of this nation and its people, and how depraved they are, and who really supports them, and who's saying nothing about their crimes. And from that perspective, it's still continuing. Israel thought that they would achieve something by having these symbolic attacks and targeting senior figures inside of Gaza or from the Hamas leadership. Targeted Ismail Haniyeh in the beginning, and then they targeted Sinwar, who died fighting them without them knowing. They knew it by coincidence. The man was fighting them inside of Gaza. But again, nothing worked. The resistance continued. Up until this day, where we are at a stage where Netanyahu is still insisting on continuing the war and putting sticks in the wheels when it comes to the ceasefire, right? However, certain things might be changing in the future, potentially with the new administration in the US. Now, this whole campaign was accompanied by unprecedented levels of coordination. Unprecedented levels of coordination from what is labeled as the resistance alliance or the resistance fronts in the region. Iran, Iraqi resistance, Lebanon, and Yemen. The first group that started to participate in support of Gaza was Lebanon. Hezbollah in particular in Lebanon, they started to participate on the 8th of October, but only to participate as a supporting front, not an active member of the war. And they did that so that, from their perspective, they do not attract an all-out war against Lebanon because, well, some people in Lebanon did not want their participation anyway, but also exhaust the Israeli army so that they don't take out their full force on Gaza. And they succeeded to a very large extent. Israel, and they were sending a message to Israel that, well, we're targeting certain bases, radars, spying devices around the border area, and this is the limit. If you escalate, we will escalate. If you attack deeper into Lebanon, we'll attack deeper into Israel. And we started this back and forth up until things blew up and became a full-scale war after the massive attacks coming from Israel with the pager attack and with the assassination of the top level of the Hezbollah leadership. Again, in a move from an Israeli perspective that was meant to be more symbolic than anything else. We can target your leaders. But the question is, did that stop any of the resistance actions against them? No. What did stop the Lebanese armed resistance from continuing to attack Israel? A political agreement. A political agreement that, is of course criticized and is very fragile. Israel is breaching it every single day. But this is what made them so. Not the firepower. Not the firepower. Because to the last day, Hezbollah were still targeting Israel. The second front that was participating heavily was the Yemeni front. The Yemeni front decided we're going to take the seas and we will attack strategic areas in Israel. We want to choke them economically. And they started targeting every ship linked with Israel, reassuring all of the other ships, we have no problem against you, but anyone who's dealing with Israel, we will target them. Something that led to an attempt of a coalition coming from the United States, but that failed miserably. That left none other than poor little US and the UK. The country that started this problem, the British Empire with the Balfour Declaration, and the main sponsor and patron of this depraved Zionist entity, which is the US administration. Other participants, they sent like an advisor or something, but no one was really happy to go and die or risk themselves, or was depraved to a level where they go and participate for the sake of a genocidal entity, with more and more criticism coming from the countries globally. Then we had the participation of Iraqi resistance movements that are tied directly with Iran. However, certain understandings between the United States administration and the Islamic Republic of Iran led to the limitation of the attacks coming from the Iraqi resistance, especially against US forces inside of Iraq. Now, there's a significant development, because in the beginning they used to target Israel and US bases, because from an Iranian perspective, Iran knew who's behind all of this. It's the United States. You know, when you talk about Israel, you don't just talk about a state, or it's talk about the United States of America. So they stopped attacking, but they continued to attack Israel. They stopped attacking U.S. bases in Iraq, but they continued to attack Israel. And in many cases, alongside with the Yemeni Ansarullah. Now they declared that they're pausing their attacks against Israel. They're pausing their attacks against Israel, and we're not seeing anyone attacking Israel from the resistance fronts, primarily apart from Yemen, Ansarullah. Why is that? Why is that the case? Well, there are many reasons for that, and we'll get to Iran in a sec. The specific requirements and specific and special situations that each front has. When you talk about countries or movements participating, you're not talking about everything. It's not all the same. They live in a different country. There's a different reality, different political reality, different geographical reality, societal reality, different levels of acceptance or approval when it comes to these attacks, and different types of threats and interests coming from foreign countries too. In Iraq, it's very heavy because the US is still present in Iraq. And from a US-Iranian communication perspective, Iraq is a very important location. Now, what did Iran do? Iran tried to play the role of the backer who does not directly participate. Up until Israel started to attack more Iranian figures, especially the attack on the previous consulate in Syria with the IRGC assassination. That led them to launch True Promise 1 at the time, in the first ever attack coming from Iran against Israel. But that attack, there was a notification, it was quite slow, some missiles landed, but it still was a massive attack against Israel. Then, of course, Israel had the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. That led to True Promise 2 that Iran only carried out after the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, because there was a lot of pressure on Iran. They killed, the pinnacle, right, or the main figure from the movements that Iran supports. So they carried out, and they declared that this attack is a response to the assassination of Haniyeh, Abbas Nil Furushan, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and the innocent people of Gaza. Okay, that was True Promise 2. True Promise 2 was the biggest and most effective missile offensive against the genocide entity. Again, Iran was saying, stop what you're doing, because we have the capacity and you cannot stop our attacks coming against you. However, Iran's purpose wasn't to go on an all-out war with Israel. They were only trying to make sure the equation remains the same, where it's in the favor of Iran rather than Israel. Because Iran, in the meantime, was getting support from Russia. Iran was coordinating with other countries too, bolstering its defense systems. That was very evident from the attacks that Israel carried out against Iran. Israel did not even come close to the Iranian borders. The projectiles were launched from Iraqi airspace that is used by the US occupation, and Iran took down most of the attacks or projectiles going to Iran. But after the Israeli attack that happened at that time, Iran said, we will be responding. Now, so far, when they said we will be responding, they have responded. As a matter of fact, many were surprised, including myself, that Iran had a response directly on Israel back in April. Iran doesn't usually do that. And one of their strength points is using other movements to attack without them getting their hands messy. However, when they said we will attack, they attacked. There were lots of criticism about the delay. The delay led to more escalation. The delay led to assassinations of more senior figures. Some said that the delay or the level of attacks coming from the Lebanese resistance also enabled Israel to carry out more attacks. All of these are criticisms outside of what's happening on the ground. And of course, everyone is entitled to say whatever they want to say. But at the end of the day, the countries or the participants themselves, they have their own calculations when it comes to all of this. Now, there is a ceasefire in Lebanon, a very fragile ceasefire that Israel breaches every single day. It's due to end in about a month's time. And Hezbollah launched a big warning yesterday. Things will be exploding. How, to what level will Benjamin Netanyahu go back in the last minute? We don't know. In the meantime, and immediately following the ceasefire in Lebanon, there was this massive change inside of Syria. All of a sudden, the Idlib controlling group, HTS, backed heavily by Turkey, declare an operation called the Deterrence of Aggression. This campaign didn't come out of nowhere. Syria has been living in turmoil for the past 14 years. Syria as a state was made up after the Sykes-Picot Agreement, with one family controlling the country in authoritarian rule for the past 50 years. And many people had criticisms against Bashar al-Assad. However, his government was considered to the resistance as a key location where certain operations of the resistance can be carried out. And Bashar al-Assad at the time, he was milking it heavily when it comes to the resistance and using that to cover up an indeed oppression that was happening against the Syrian people. And when it comes to the Syrian revolution, of course, Syrian revolution is something that you can talk about for many hours. It started off as something very basic, and it started to become more and more tense after the assassination of a child in Der'a by the security forces of al-Assad. Things started to spark quickly. Then things quickly turned to violence. But it wasn't only Syrians who were participants in that, because Syria has many countries who are interested in it. It's a key location, strategic location for Turkey. It's a strategic location for the US. It's a strategic location for Russia. It's a strategic location for Israel. It's a strategic location for the Arab states as a whole, including the Gulf states. Okay. Then things were escalating. There were foreign interventions. There were a lot of attempts to make a massive civil war, a massive sectarian civil war. There was a lot of sectarian talk, both from the sides opposing and the sides supporting Assad, because Assad managed to gather more surroundings with him, primarily when it comes to Iran and Hezbollah and Russia. Their excuse for participation wasn't against, at the time, what they said as the Syrian people. However, those who were on the opposing side did not really buy that excuse. Then things started to de-escalate up until, and there were many conferences inside of Syria, peace conferences outside of Syria too, to try and get the people back together, primarily with the Astana meetings and the understandings between them, Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Okay, 4 years passed since the understandings of Astana. During those past 4 years, Erdogan was reaching towards Bashar al-Assad. He was a very good ally to al-Assad before things started to heat up in 2011. But he reached out to al-Assad, and the Astana agreement said that we need to get a solution and unify the whole of Syria and the one-party rule. Okay. Turkey reached out for him. Russia reached out for him. Assad was refusing to meet, refusing to budge, refusing to share any of his ruling with anyone else from Syria or from the opposition. Then they saw it as an opportunity. Okay, there's a ceasefire with Lebanon now. From their perspective, no one can say that we're trying to hinder anything now because there's a ceasefire. And we want to have this campaign. All of a sudden, you see the Assad forces crumbling one after the other. This was one of the fastest changes that happened in recent history. Hardly any bloodshed. The majority of the locations the opposition took control of, or hardly with any confrontation, really. They were telling the Assad forces, just hand in your weapons and you will be safe, you will be removed completely, you can go back to your homes. Okay. There were, of course, exceptions with people who, from the opposition's perspective, were in charge of massacres, for example, or Sadnaya, or mass graves, Ma'arat al-Nu'man, all of these areas. There was lots of problems and massacres. Over, some people say over 1 million were killed in the past 14 years in Syria, with 9 million refugees and mass graveyards and many people in prisons. And now more and more things are being revealed. Okay, up until it reached a level where they took control over Damascus. Now, none of that can be something that anyone can really have a complete and total opinion on, because this is something that is still evolving. More and more information is coming out about, well, how and why did the Assad government collapse? Why did the Iranians and Russians not take action if that man was so strategic for them? Why did Hezbollah not take any action? There were, of course, talks and meetings between the Turks, between the Russians and the Iranians. The Turkish foreign minister said, we spoke with the Iranians and the Russians about this operation, and we advised them not to participate for the sake of Assad. And they saw al-Assad and his forces not fighting, not doing anything. And then al-Assad fled himself by even ignoring some of his closest aides, not telling any one of them. Reports are coming now that he was betting on certain participation from countries that no one expected, like Jordan and the UAE. Talks about him getting certain offers or offering certain settlements between the United States and Israel in the last second. Iran finding out certain treacherous behavior. That's why things are moving so quickly. But the situation is evolving very quickly. Now, when it comes to all of these changes, including the fact that we are still ongoing a massive change when it comes to Palestine, and the war is still going, the genocide is still going, there's still no ceasefire. Things could heat up with Hezbollah immediately in the north. Yemen is still attacking them. They're warning Yemen, they're attacking Yemen, they're warning Yemen with an all-out war, and they're also warning Iran. The card is on the table. Where are things going? Things are heating up. Firstly, there's a massive shift. There's a massive shift in the whole region. There's a reshaping happening. The biggest threat that is happening is on Israel. Israel is doing whatever it can to try and portray it otherwise. But the fact of the matter is, Israel had so many things that never happened before during the past 15 months. The unprecedented attack on the 7th of October that many in Israel say is the biggest attack on Israel, even worse than the 6th of October with the war between them and Egypt in 1973. For the first time in history, Israel is trying to enforce conscription in certain parts of society. For the first time in history, refusal levels are at 50% when it comes to Israel. For the first time in history, Israel has to dig in its federal reserves of their national bank because of their economic situation. For the first time in history, they've been degraded not once but twice by the world's largest credit rating agencies. For the first time in history, there's a massive exodus coming from inside of Israel to outside of it, with millions fleeing the country. For the first time in history, there's so much criticism, not only against the political level, but against the military establishment. The military establishment in Israel was considered to be a taboo. It was a taboo to criticize it. Now it's nothing criticizing the army. It's nothing to refuse to serve in the army. None of these things matter anymore. Their economy is in the pits. People in Israel are losing faith in the whole idea and the whole concept of this facade of a Jewish state that was sold to them by Zionists, which is nothing but a neo-colonialist, terrorist, supremacist movements supported by powers that are just as terrorist and as supremacist as it is So where are things going? To understand where are things going, we need to understand who's benefiting and who's losing. The ones who are losing are the people, primarily the people of Gaza, but also the people of Israel and the people of the region, with the risk of an all-out war in West Asia. That's not something that is acceptable by anyone. And of course, the Israeli genocide in Gaza was primarily there and still is to cover up the grave failure that they're facing militarily and the fact that they are unable to achieve any of their objectives. Don't forget the early days when Netanyahu every single day was saying, we want to eliminate the Hamas. That's no longer the case. He's not even talking about that. We've been criticizing him from the beginning, saying it's a recipe of failure by him actually saying that. Okay, who's winning? That's the key question here. Those who are winning are, and again, you can't really describe that as a win, but those who are profiteering from this are the ones making money out of what's happening and having certain interests received. What are they? Okay. Number one, first and foremost, the United States military industrial complex. They are making masses and masses of amounts of money from the taxpayer money. The American money going to foreign countries such as Ukraine and to Israel is money being handed out to these states as foreign aid. How does foreign aid work? Foreign aid works in the form of taking money or stealing money from the taxpayer without asking the taxpayer or the American taxpayer. Isn't a priority to ask them, how should we spend your money, Mr. Taxpayer? No. Even though Americans are dying in the streets, epidemics here and there, homelessness, no health care, violence, school shootings. The United States has a lot of priorities apart from channeling money to commit crimes and kill more people as cannon fodder for the military industrial complex. But this money is stolen from the taxpayers' money and is being handed out not to the countries involved, no, to the American companies supporting these countries with arms. How? That's primarily how it works. Apart from the side of bribery and buying people and of course the blackmailing networks and the ex-Epsteins and the new Epstein networks, these things play a crucial role. But when it comes to the military-industrial complex, these people profiteer. And from their perspective, if there's a war, that means we're making more money. That means we have an interest to keep that money coming in. How do we keep the money coming in? By providing more and more excuses to the war itself and by feeding the war. How do we feed the war? We act and we pretend like we want to end it, but on the other hand, we constantly channel in more weapons. Otherwise, how can anyone explain, how can any rational-minded person explain the fact that the United States politically is saying that, well, yeah, we want to stop the war and we're, advising Prime Minister Netanyahu, we want a ceasefire, but at the same time, supporting him with arms. Something is stinking, something is fishy here. Well, firstly, you're liars. Secondly, well, you're not really interested in ending the war because some people are still profiteering, let alone the fact, and that's one of the key factors here, Benjamin Netanyahu himself is leading this campaign. There's no denying that despite the US interests in the region, other countries too, but primarily the United States, it's Benjamin Netanyahu making the decisions. And Benjamin Netanyahu, he has the power to make certain decisions, doesn't he? He has the capacity to do that, but he does not. For what? For his own personal gain, for his personal benefit. Benjamin Netanyahu is a psychopathic narcissist. He led Israel to 7 elections in 6 years, forming governments with anyone under the sun, so long as they're willing to have a government with him, at a tiny minority, leading to instability, spending much of Israel's resources unnecessarily for these pointless elections, simply because he doesn't want to step down. And now there's more and more corruption cases against him, and he's going to the courts, and he even had an ICC warrant issued against him. Now, what could happen? What could happen moving forward? Will things escalate or will things de-escalate? Okay, a key point in what things would look like is certain moves that Donald Trump could be making when he comes to office in the end of January. Now, we all know that Donald Trump served Israel when he was the president before, between 2016 and 2020. We know that he is funded by the same people who fund Benjamin Netanyahu. We know that Miriam Edelson, a profound Zionist, supported him with $100 million. We know that the settlement establishment inside of Israel supports him heavily. However, Donald Trump, and that's not to either put faith in Donald Trump or expect something positive from him, but one of the characteristics of Donald Trump himself is the fact that he can be erratic, and some of his moves cannot always be read properly. Okay. He was saying statements like, we want to end the war, but when it comes to Israel, he was saying, oh no, continue. And he was having these abhorrent statements against the Palestinian supporters and anti-war protesters inside of the United States. But still, Donald Trump might do certain things that no one really anticipated. And his general tone was, well, withdrawing more troops and spending more on the American people, America first, according to him. He previously withdrew troops from certain places, including from Syria. Okay, where is he going? Where is he going to go? Is he going to allow Benjamin Netanyahu to have everything that he wants? Or is he going to have more restrictions and use more leverage against Benjamin Netanyahu? That would be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, factors in judging where things would be going. Because without the United States, Israel is nothing. Israel is zero. Israel is a fake entity planted there by ex-arrogant supremacist colonies and now still supported by the US administration. If they decide to, that's it, shut the tap, Israel will die, because it's a fake entity, fake nationality, fake people, made up names. They change their surnames to become more suitable. They steal everything and make it theirs. Everything is fake. Pseudo history, pseudo narrative, pseudo people, pseudo nation. Nothing that they will do will change these facts. But so long as, well, there's someone profiteering from what's happening, there might be a case where they would let it move forward. Okay, another question arises here. So a lot of it depends on that, because from the resistance side, we still haven't seen decisive action being taken against Israel, despite the fact that there's arguably sufficient levels of weapons to hurt Israel badly, as in to make it kneel down, and primarily from Iran, by the way. However, they did not, for some reason. And of course, the situation with the Arab governments is more than shameful, witnessing a genocide next to them, not lifting a finger. But we haven't seen that yet. Will that be seen? Or is there an agreement that might end at some point? That's one thing. Second thing is, does the United States genuinely views Israel, do they view Israel as a country that they really have an interest in keeping in the West Asian region? Do they? Or do they not? Or are they seeing Israel die and they're just trying to milk it as they die? Examples of US administration behavior in the past decades proves that none of the reasons they illegally participated abroad against foreign nations and foreign countries in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, in West Asia, and now in Ukraine too, none of them were sincere and genuine. How? Okay, let's look at the war in Afghanistan, for example. 20 years. 20 years, trillions of taxpayers' money. Why did they go? They went to take down the Taliban. and to instill democracy and teach these people how to behave and educate them. Didn't they say that? And women's rights. What did they do? They withdrew 20 years later after trillions have been spent. By who? By the taxpayer. Who paid? Who did they pay? Military industrial complex who made the trillions. The people need to understand that. Then again, Ukraine. And that tells you whether they weren't sincere. They went out knowing the Taliban would come back, and the Taliban come back. Waste of money, waste of lives. Their soldiers went as cannon fodder just because they fell for the propaganda and glamorization of the military and the military-industrial complex in the US. They let them play video games, how they kill people, and then they send them by using the fact that they're so poor and have no opportunities, telling them the army is your exit. And they're fooled because of their situation and because of their ignorance, and they're young, and they have no other opportunity, and they'll go thinking that this is and they use them as cannon fodder, killing them, destroying them, going back home, and then they have PTSD. 20 of them commit suicide every single day in the United States. Let's look at Ukraine. Was it for the sake of the Ukrainian people? Almost a million Ukrainians have been killed fighting for Zelensky. Didn't they know that they have no chance and they stand no chance against Russia? Were they sincere? And if they were sincere, well, of course they're not sincere, because the same principles they go and support countries based upon, they differ from one place to another based on interest. Okay. Is that the same thing with Israel? There's an argument that it is. Why? Okay. Let's say the United States actually views Israel as a very important and strategic partner for some bizarre reason, despite the fact that this country committed treason against the US. They took down US ships, they killed Americans, and they spy on the Americans too. Are they interested in them as a state? Maybe not. Maybe they are using all of this war to continuously make more and more money up until Israel falls. The CIA, they knew that Israel would be crumbling. Anyone with an ounce of brain who's viewing the state of Israel knows that it's a failed state, destroyed from within, a pariah state. And what they've done in the past 15 months is beyond recovery. There is no healing and there is no recovery. There's only one solution: the dismantling and uprooting of Zionism from the land of Palestine. And that's it. Then letting the people decide what they want, everyone. And then between the Jordan River to the sea, people have equal rights. And Palestinians need to receive their historical rights. Is the US preparing for that, and they're just using that? Or are they really genuine when it comes to supporting Israel? It looks like their level of support of Israel is primarily financial, then to do with certain geopolitical interests, financial, corporate. The US is a militaristic oligarchy. They push their empire by force to gain money and to dictate the global economy and enforce hegemony. And any other country that doesn't want to submit to the will of the US militaristic oligarchy, they either wage war against them or they choke them with sanctions. Now they're realizing that that cannot last forever. However, like with many other empires, they get blinded. They get blinded by arrogance and by the fact that they are powerful and by the fact that they were at the top for such a long time. But there is no denying that the world is changing. The world is changing. We're witnessing the beginning of a new world, and a new world order, where the United States will no longer be the world's biggest superpower and dictating what's going on. We have the rise of the BRICS. We have the rise of China, of Iran, of Russia, of Turkey, and the BRICS themselves now That's another thing here. They have a back route, a back door to US sanctions. If the US can impose sanctions on so many countries, how are they surviving? Iran had a backdoor with China, and Russia had a backdoor with other participants from the BRICS. So there's something else being done here, right? And if the United States and its support, the United States administration and its support for Israel is genuine, then how would they allow them to get away with all of this, knowing how harmful it is? Propaganda on its own isn't enough. Spending millions to buy people and for people to push propaganda and ads and what have you, that's not going to be enough. People are seeing what's happening. We have a genocide being live streamed. That's not enough. That indicates that they don't really care about Israel or the Israelis whatsoever, really. I mean, without the US influence, there's an argument that inside of Israel, something might have changed. And Israel as a state would be more independent apart from this support that constantly wants it to be a barking dog that wages war and intimidates everyone and acts as the biggest hub of terror in the world. Okay. Does that mean they're preparing for Israel's fall? 100%. They're preparing for Israel's fall. Now, with the rise of Zionism, they started to infiltrate different religious groups, by the way. And one of the main groups they wanted to infiltrate was the Christians, to sell this notion of this Judeo-Christian nation and sell the idea of Zionism, sell the idea of a God's chosen people and all of this talk. But again, that's also collapsing with more changes, even with profoundly Zionist Christian movements traditionally inside of the US, like the evangelical community, with changes not coming from the younger generation, but also from the older generation. Israel left no one any excuse not to know 15 months into a genocide. Everyone can know, everyone can read, everyone can see, everyone can research. No one has an excuse. No one has an excuse, even if their religious preachers told them otherwise. No one has an excuse. So now they're seeing it. And of course, in the thing that is very different now is not only the public opinion has changed forever against this little supremacist entity of terror, but the perception for the first time within the Jewish community could be at its worst in Israel's history. And there are many indications for that. Zionism struggled to bring religious Jews on board in the beginning. They started to have success only after certain rabbis agreed. But traditional Jewish Orthodox, they did not really buy into the concept of Zionism. To this day, why are they struggling to enforce conscription against the Orthodox community inside of Israel now? Because they don't really believe in Zionism. To them, Zionism is heresy, is secularism, and to them, they prefer to be in a Palestinian state, many of them, right? And those who are allied with Netanyahu are allied for their own interests inside of the government. They don't buy into the idea of Zionism. Abroad, so you have the internal problems, not only with the Orthodox, but also within Israeli society itself, the general Israeli society with secularism, and many of them are leaving. Now, abroad, unprecedented numbers of Jews are having internal conflicts. Now, are we supporting Zionism or are we not supporting Zionism? Is Israel truly a representation of a state for the Jewish people? Do they represent Judaism, or are they using us as pawns, as nothing but cannon fodder, material for one of the ugliest projects the world has seen in the past century? More and more people are inclined to believe the other notion within the Jewish community, to levels where some people who are profound Zionists are not speaking with family members, and I personally have experienced many of them, because they are denouncing Zionism. New polls in the United States 2/3 of the Jewish community inside of the US. Well, they were speaking about the younger generation supporting the armed Palestinian resistance against Israel. What does that tell you? All of that tells you that the concept and the idea of Zionism has been exposed. And the exposure is the thing that can hurt Israel the most and is the beginning of the end of them. Because Zionism thrives in the dark. In the past 15 months, they have been under the light. They have been scrutinized. They have been monitored. People started to dig up about them. People started to know more about them. People who were fooled by this ideology are waking up. It's not an ideology that serves Judaism in any way, shape, or form. And as a matter of fact, it's an ideology that has been the worst thing for Jewish people altogether in history. So Israel has no path of recovery following this. The only thing we're seeing is Israel buying time, like they have for many years before. The only difference is now there is no going back. There is no manipulating anyone. Everyone knows what's happening. People who were sympathetic in the beginning, following the 7th of October with Israel, they switched views and positions within a week or 2, 3 max, by seeing what this genocidal terror entity is inflicting on the other side. And then, of course, we started to have more confirmations and more revelations coming. So there's no denying that we are witnessing the end of Zionism. And the end of Zionism is coinciding and coming simultaneously with the collapse of the hegemony of the United States empire and the rise of a multipolar world. During the process, and like many empires have done in the past, they would not let go very easily, and they would get out the worst in them to try and maintain their power. But that moment is the darkest moment before the dawn and before a new era that we are undoubtedly going to reach. And that's what I wanted to share with you in this recap of 2024 and expectations about the 2025. And I'll open the space up now for you, everyone, to participate, ask any questions. If you wouldn't mind, if you have any questions, just highlight them so I can see them properly with like something like this here. Just so that I can clearly see them. Let me go from the beginning, check if I can access things from the beginning. Jay, Molly, Jay again, Donna, Marion, Khaled, Glenn, and Josie. Thank you so much for your supers, much appreciated. Try and check if any of you participated before. But again, if you wouldn't mind, if you have anything, you can share it now, and I'll try and address as many questions as possible. And of course, I wish you all a happy new year soon for you and your loved ones. Christopher Kelly, you touched on Israel trying to infiltrate Yemen. Someone reported that USA Mossad cell was arrested in Yemen. What do you think? Well, undoubtedly, the United States intelligence and the Israeli intelligence as well, they would try their best to take down Ansarullah. However, either these people are in denial about who they fight with, or they're just trying to portray something just for public opinion. You are fighting people full of belief and faith, who believe that this world is temporary and that there is an eternal world and reward following this temporary world. Trying to scare them with killing or whatever, that doesn't work against them. Look at Gaza. Look at Lebanon. Look at Yemen. Yemen, a country with millions of people protesting every single week. Yemen, those leading the front in Yemen, they're representing millions of people who would be willing to die dignified than live as cowards. So that's the mentality. That's the mentality that cannot be defeated. That cannot be defeated. In addition to that, they have capabilities. They have capabilities, and they are increasing their capabilities. So you can send any agent you want or how much force you want. That's not going to work. And again, most of that is a show. Listen, let me tell you something very important, okay? The psychological warfare is more important than the warfare on the ground. The war in the media, in people's minds, is more important than the war on the ground. In the effect generally. Why? Because how do you defeat someone? By making them believe that they're defeated. If you make them feel and believe that they're defeated, then you defeated them. Then you would be achieving, one of Sun Tzu's main rules. Defeat them without using power, intimidation, scaring. This is what they're trying to do. However, you're not dealing with people who are, lacking faith. Their faith can be volunteered to millions and billions of people. It's not going to work. It's simply not going to work. Even if they use more force, and trust you me, they're struggling to find anything that they can hurt them with militarily. And backup, thank you so much, and everyone else, and Ray Cononers, thank you as well, my friend. Allah يحفظك حبيبي, thank you. Okay. Ramplan Netanyahu is in hospital the day after a surgery. Well, looks like he had cancer. Some people are saying he's doing it to try and avoid the courts. Netanyahu has a history of health problems. He has been hospitalized multiple times. And Yariv Levin took his position temporarily. Several years back, there was a leak in Israel that Netanyahu was suffering from cancer. And he sued, according to reports that I heard, the people who started to publish this information. The last thing people would want to see is the prime minister leading them with cancer. Okay. Now it looks like it's getting worse. So they're definitely hiding something. Like the man is hiding his corruption. But he's still there. You know what I mean? The only thing is, if he dies, we might potentially reach a ceasefire earlier, but we won't finish with the problem. The problem would still be there. Gatina Perez Mahmoud, do you think Assad is going to be prosecuted for crimes against humanity? Listen, with this, with the crimes against humanity thing, firstly, the main thing I have to say is the biggest war criminals that have committed crimes against humanity sit in London and in Washington and in Paris and in other countries. They don't sit in West Asia. So if there's anyone who wants to prosecute anyone against for crimes against humanity, you would start off with Bush, Blair, and everyone up until now. What? That's the first thing, okay? Before anyone talks about it. Secondly, with Assad himself, well, clearly we still don't know the picture, the full picture when it comes to Assad. Why he left? What was the actual deal? There are only certain reports. Why did he go to Russia? Did he try and go somewhere else? Why did he hide it from other people? Were other people protecting him to the last second? And, you know, based on how things are going, it might take a long time. And if anyone wants to, you know, take action against Bashar al-Assad, for example, for crimes against humanity, they're going to have to take it with the legal route. So the question is, are those in power now in Syria, would they want to go down the legal route to follow him up when there's still a lot of work to be done in Syria itself? There's a lot of questions about this, but I think the primary thing is to look at the biggest war criminals on earth. And the biggest war criminals on earth now, they are roaming around freely, and no one is taking any action against them. And guess what? They have been protected from any legal action too when they started committing their war crimes as well. Okay, let's see if we have anything else before we wrap up. Ramplans, you cannot escape the wrath of God. No, you cannot. Absolutely not. But I think many people want to, they want to see wrath on earth against criminals. But yeah, absolutely. You know, these people will be getting what they deserve. Tam Makish Mahmoud, what do you think of Trump saying that Imran Khan should be released? I actually haven't heard that. It's interesting that you brought this to my attention. Trump's incoming envoy raises hopes of a free Imran Khan. Oh, that's actually interesting. Yeah, there were a couple of reports. Interesting. I'm telling you, like this move again. You know, I'm not a fan of any of these leaders, and not endorsing anyone here. But like I said, Trump, he has certain things that cannot be expected. You know, you don't know really where he would go. Some people say that most of what he does is to serve his own interests. Talking about a man who comes from a business background, and in many cases he deals with countries as he would with business. And listen, the man, I mean, what I would hope that people would understand, not that, you know, what we hope is really relevant in many of the cases, but the level of power these people have, primarily with your role as the president of the United States, and I don't care who supported you, and I don't care about those behind you, but when you are in the position, you can make decisions. And if these decisions are made for good purposes, things can be much better. You can have much less bloodshed. And if he does that with Imran Khan, for example, that would be something very important. That would be something very important. But the most pressing thing is to end the genocide in Gaza. That is the most pressing thing before anything. Stop the bloodshed. Wherever you can and you have the means to, stop the bloodshed. That's the primary thing. Stop the bloodshed of innocent civilians. There is nothing more pressing than that. No financial reasons, no gains, and nothing really. And thank you everyone for your wishes as well. We'll wrap it up there. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in for another show. And thank you for your participation, not only now, but for the past year as well. Of course, I look forward to being with you here next year. Hopefully, talking about more positive stuff. I mean, it's a responsibility to talk about the most pressing things, and of course, with the continuation of the genocide in Gaza, we will have to continue covering everything and revealing everything and going into the details of everything, because unfortunately when you just talk about things in general, it's not enough to understand where things are going. So we hope and pray that there will be peace. I mean, ideally, peace for everyone in West Asia and across the world, and prosperity and understanding between human beings, and that we reach a stage where conflicts are no longer dealt with by force, but by talking, by diplomatic means. Of course, we might be very, very far from that, but it's also not an excuse not to remind that this is hopefully the path, and talk about the things that are important: understanding, openness, compassion, love, and respect. And hopefully we'll, once we have a slight de-escalation, to talk about things that are more light-hearted. I'll try and diversify as well in the next year with you, but not by compromising or taking down the focus on the most pressing things. And we'll wrap it up there, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for all of your participation. I'll hopefully be with you with hopefully a segment after this, maybe, or tomorrow during the day, and then another video or videos in the coming year and years ahead as well. Very exciting. Stay blessed, everyone. I wish you and your loved ones a blessed new year. May all of you be happy, prosperous, spiritually, mentally, financially, and we'll see better things moving ahead and in the future. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your night or day or evening, depending on where you are, or morning. And I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone, and take care.